trauma-based, you know, they were sent to school dressed as women, they were constantly raped as a child, they were traumatized and this sort of thing. The use of LSD, particularly in the Charles Manson cult and stuff like that. And what you'll find a lot of the time is that these killings, there's a lot more to it than, I mean, let's just look at Roman Polanski for a start, okay? Sirhan was a friend of Roman Polanski, coincidence. Bobby Kennedy was at Roman Polanski's house the day before he was shot. I'm sure that's a coincidence. Sharon Tate was a friend of Charles Manson. She'd been seen going to the ranch which was owned by a film company. You know, Charles Manson was friends with Neil Young. He was friends with the Beach Boys. He was an influential figure in this Haight-Ashbury, and mysteriously he arrived there at exactly the same time that all these other people did. Right. You know.
Right, we'll come a little bit more up to date now, and I'll just mention a few perhaps UK cases that possibly may have been mind control candidates. And one would be Dunblane, where many people believe that, was it Hamilton?
Thomas Hamilton.
Thomas Hamilton was possibly mind controlled, and that the possible motive for his, you know, killing all of those innocent children was that those children were possibly part of it being abused by paedophiles.
Yeah, paedophile sex ring.
In an establishment paedophile ring, and had been starting to tell their teacher what was going on. Yeah. And that was why he was programmed, you know, to do that. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's certainly possible. I think it's very, very similar to the McMartin preschool trial case in America, where basically, you know, again, people are coming in and saying, oh, these poor children, they've got false memories, they're making it up. And it's not true. Basically, there were tunnels underneath the McMartin preschool that led to satanic ritual sites. They found the skinned body of a baby underneath this site, and they found receipts that proved that these tunnels had been filled in. Like, there are connections, and there are connections to mind control. This is like what we were talking about earlier. These children can be used and sold in basically the white slave trade. They can be used in satanic ritual. Yes. They can be used to turn into MK Ultra, and they can be used for blackmail.
So we've come back to the connection between children and mind control, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which, you know...
The thing about the Thomas Hamilton case is that you've got to look at all the officials that basically swept in and caused the investigation to sort of tie up very, very quickly. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is to do with the sort of paedophile case. A lot of people were saying, oh, this is just a very easy way to control guns and, you know, get handguns out of the English, which is very true as well, you know. But again, with a lot of these serial killers, you find that you've got one or two hits, assassinations for a specific reason, and they muddy the waters by attaching other killings to them.
So the Manchurian Candidate might kill 10 people, and there's one or two of them is the ones they wanted rid of, and because they've killed so many people, no one can see a motive.
Yeah, and David Berkowitz, for a start, okay, one of those people was killed because it was a connection to, one of the sort of Sam killings was because she found out about a cult. One was because they burned a Hollywood producer over cocaine, and so he was killed as a response. And the very first killing was to be filmed and distributed for snuff purposes. You know, and again, all these things intertwine, and then you've got certain other killings around that muddy the waters.
There's always far more to these mass killings than people realise. I am 100% sure of that. And I was on a plane when you know, the Derek Bird incident happened, and we were sitting next to some people, and I overheard a conversation. The guy was reading the Daily Mail or something like that, and he said,
informed.
He tapped his mate on the shoulder, and he said, "Oh, you know what the real motive was, don't you? You know what the reason was? The guy was upset about his will."
Yeah, that would be it.
You know, and I thought, how naive, right? Because I believe that in that case, I think he was most likely a Manchurian Candidate.
I think it's certainly possible.
And I looked at the victims, and one of the victims, the second person killed, was Kevin Commons, the guy's solicitor.
Yes.
And I don't think he would have been administering Derek Bird's will, because there was several officers he had. He owned the whole solicitor's practice. Yeah. But he was in the process of legal action against United Utilities, who were responsible, or allegedly responsible, for the floods which took place in Cumbria, in which one man died. Yeah. Now, he believed, Kevin Commons, that they were responsible for those floods because they hadn't managed the level of a reservoir correctly. Now, I'm digressing a bit here, but what I'm saying is there's a clear motive by a very large company that has connections to possibly get rid of that solicitor. Oh, yeah. And nobody's looked at that.
No,
You
no,
know?
why would you? Because we've been presented with this very, very, very sort of neat, like with 9/11, doesn't
Yeah.
quite make sense, but it's
Yeah.
neat enough, it's Hollywood enough for us to say we've got a start, we've got a finish, and we've got a middle,
Yeah.
and that satisfies all, because most people aren't interested in it. Most people, why would they want to go out and start investigating these things? I've got products to buy. I'm far too busy to be investigating all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy.
Yeah, I need to watch Skating on Shite, tonight. Okay then, Neil, thank you very much indeed for coming on board. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we're going to have a few pints now.
Yes, lovely.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
In this show, Neil Sanders talked about mind control. In the previous one, which you can watch again from the richplanet.net website, he described physical techniques to control subjects' minds and effectively program them for specific purposes. These techniques to directly control a mind include psychotronics, whereby very small, remotely controlled devices called implants are inserted into the brain and can make the person do whatever the implant is telling them. Other techniques include control by microwave radiation, extra-low frequency radiation, and also drugs, and of course, hypnosis. My interviews with Neil Sanders were well timed, because a TV documentary entitled Madness in the Fast Lane, screened recently on BBC, telling the story of two Swedish women, could well be describing the effects of both direct mind control of the women and indirect mind control of the population, with the production of the documentary itself. I will briefly describe what happens in the documentary, but recommend you watch Madness in the Fast Lane from the BBC website. It is not often I point people to this propagandist website, but it is necessary to watch this so that viewers understand what is most likely going on here, which is certainly not what was put forward in the documentary. I will briefly describe the story. In May 2008, the two Swedish women were seen on traffic CCTV walking up the central reservation of a motorway in the UK. Both of them then start running out in front of oncoming motorway traffic. A police car nearby, which just so happened to have a BBC film crew in it, attended the scene. When they got there, the women were on the hard shoulder, apparently in perfect health. Suddenly, one of the women runs out into the motorway, seemingly under the wheels of a speeding lorry, although it is clear that many frames were removed from the footage, so we do not really see the lorry doing any damage. The police try to stop her, but she pulls away from them and into the road. Shortly after this, the second woman does exactly the same. Again, frames are removed from the BBC film, and she is seen lying in the middle of the road. The police then attend to what they expect could be two fatalities. One of the women then gets up off her feet, removes her jacket, and starts having a fight with one of the cops. The other woman then also tries to get up and shouts out, "They will take your organs." The documentary states that the women are 41-year-old identical twins and are Swedish. After the police eventually deal with the situation and the women are let out of custody, one of them goes on to murder an ex-RAF serviceman, who she meets in a street and then later stabs him to death at his home with a knife. She walks away from the attack, hitting herself repeatedly over the head with a hammer. She is currently serving a sentence for murder. Towards the end of the documentary, a professor appears who explains to the audience the two different explanations put forward by the defense and prosecution when trying to explain the psychology of the Swedish women. The defense and prosecution allegedly tried to explain the bizarre behavior in two different ways, but both were suggesting that the women were suffering from some sort of rare psychological condition. One of these conditions was that the psychosis was contagious, and one woman caught the condition off her sister.